Karamo Report, pursuing the truth, dissolving the complexities of religion, culture, and politics.
Welcome to the Karamo Report. Today, we're going to be interviewing Alex Newman from the Liberty Sentinel. We'll be discussing a variety of topics from democide to AI, carbon capture, and much more, including what the church can do to stop the globalist movement that is being foisted upon us. Well, everyone, we want to welcome Mr. Alex Newman, who is an award-winning journalist, educator, author, speaker, investor, nationally syndicated radio host, and consultant who seeks to glorify God in everything he does. Thank you, Alex, for joining us.
It's great to be here. Thank you for having me, Kristina.
So, Alex, how would you describe the globalist tyrannical system that is somewhat being imposed on us incrementally? How would you describe the individuals that we're up against in their base pathology?
Well, again, thank you for having me. And I think what we're dealing with here is more than just bad policy ideas. It's more than just, the standard excuses we hear that they're just greedy. They just want more money. I think when you really drill down into the people that are working on imposing this totalitarian system on us at the international level, we're dealing with actual evil in the truest sense of the term. And I always like to take it back to the scriptures. 3,000 years ago, David warned us about the kings of the earth, the rulers conspiring together or taking counsel together against the Lord and his anointed. And I look out and that's exactly what I see. The rulers, the kings conspiring together against God, whether that be through the United Nations or the World Economic Forum. I also go to Paul in his letter to the church at Ephesus in chapter 6. He talks about the powers and the principalities, the spiritual wickedness in high places that we are really battling against. And so I would argue that it's not even just evil people. We're dealing here with demonic forces from the pit of hell. And frankly, I don't think you can understand what we're up against unless you look at it through a biblical lens. It just doesn't make sense otherwise.
I agree with you 100% on that, because oftentimes when I talk to people about the globalist cult, that's what I refer to them. They have many names, for lack of a better term, but this globalist cult we're faced, like you mentioned, with the lack of situational awareness that many people have, who think that it's just money and power and greed. It's like, no, these people are completely satanic. They are satanic, and they operate in secret, and they have multiple organizations, as you mentioned, like the World Economic Forum, the Bilderberg, the Trilateral, Council on Foreign Relations, and the list goes on of these entities that they have where they train and deploy their operatives into our government. And as you mentioned, oftentimes people think they're bad policy, but why is it such a problem when the average citizen think it's just bad policy and not understanding this demonic force that we're actually facing?
Well, it's problematic because if you have the wrong diagnosis, you're obviously going to come up with the wrong treatment. You're obviously going to come up with the wrong cure, right? And you just think of it like a medical problem. If you walk into your doctor's office and you've got gangrene on your leg and it needs to be amputated, but instead he says, looks like you have a tick on your arm. We're going to amputate your arm. That's not actually going to solve the gangrene you have on your leg, right? Mm-hmm. So if you misunderstand the nature of the problem, you're going to come up with incorrect solutions. And our great U.S. Secretary of Defense wore many generations ago, James Forrestal, he actually put it very well. He said, consistency has never been the hallmark of stupidity. If these men who've so bungled our foreign policy were merely stupid, occasionally they would make a mistake in our favor, right? And yet it's always serves to undermine the United States, undermine our freedom, undermine national sovereignty. And so we have to understand that these aren't well-intentioned people with bad policy ideas. These are evil people who actually believe that they are superior to us, that they should rule over us, not just for their own benefit, but for ours, that there are too many of us on this planet. I think they regard us very much like, slaves or ants or cattle, mm-hmm. right? We're here for their amusement. We're here for serving them. And if you misunderstand this, if you think these are just bad people, people with bad ideas that you can convince with your superior arguments and your logic and your reason, you might as well just go beat your head against a brick wall, because you're not going to make any progress at all.
Yeah, it's the hallmark of design. Like you said,
That's
it's right. The consistency. You can tell, even in a theory of intelligent design, how we can tell that we were designed to specify complexity. So
That's
there's
right.
too much complexity and there's too much consistency on what's being enacted on us that you can tell that this is a long-term plan. And I think it's also important for people to understand that this is not global cooperation, right? We want global cooperation where sovereign nations are able to cooperate and trade and interact with each other for mutual benefit. What we're discussing is us actually being swallowed up by this behemoth system. And I think another thing, Alex, too, could you discuss why this is such a threat to us? Because some may say, I remember I used to teach, I used to be a college instructor, and I remember talking to one of my colleagues, and she very innocently said, well, I don't really think it's such a bad idea if we all work together. And, in a way that a lot of these things are marketed to us, if we all have the same and we have the same education, we have the same information, and there's no disparity. This is not communism the way a lot of people think of it. This is something where it's an entire global system we'll all be swallowed up into. So can you talk about why this is such a threat and this is not just a couple of crazy Marxist professors on a college campus?
This is an absolutely enormous threat, and I think Exhibit A would be COVID, right? If you had told people in late 2019 that within a few months the entire world would be locked down, you wouldn't be able to go to work, your grandma was going to die alone in a hospital, being pumped full of poison, you were going to have to take weird experimental injections with mRNA that would have the ability to alter the genetic code God wrote for you if you wanted to be able to go to a store or have a job, people would have laughed at you. They would have sent the guys with the white lab coats to come and put you in a rubber room. And yet, the entire world saw exactly that happening. That is the enormity of the threat, right? And if they can do it with a COVID, they can do it with anything else. So we need to recognize that this is a threat to everything good. Okay. And I think you can break this down systematically. I mean, you were talking about the idea of a nation state. And I grew up around the world. I mostly grew up outside of the United States. I only lived here till I was 4. I grew up with kids from all over the world in very elite international schools. And so I got a massive dose of this globalist propaganda. Nations are bad because then people will fight and then we'll have wars. And so they teach these kids. I went to school with the kids that are supposed to be, I guess, the managerial class for the New World Order, for lack of a better term. And they instill in them from a very early age that this is a good idea. And, other people aren't as smart as you. And we need to be the good shepherds here who lead them to peace and prosperity and all this kind of stuff. Let's go back to the scriptures for a minute, right? Whose idea was it to divide mankind into nations? Well, it turns out that was God's idea. If you don't believe me, go to Deuteronomy chapter 32, go to Acts chapter 17. God says very, very clearly that he divided mankind into nations, that he fixed the borders of the peoples. He wanted mankind divided into nations. That was his design, and also tribes and tongues. And again, you can read the whole story of how this unfolded in Genesis chapter 11, the Tower of Babel. We defied God. God said, spread out. We said, no, we're just going to build a big tower and get up to heaven. And so God forced the issue. And so what we see is God's design for mankind was to be split into nations. Satan's design is to erase that and build a one-world satanic system. God's design for mankind was to have humanity divided up into families with a mother and a father and children that would then disciple the next generation. So we see, again, a satanic effort to take down the family. It was God's design that people should have liberty. He's the one who gave us the right to life, right? He said, thou shalt not murder. He's the one who gave us the right to property. Thou shalt not steal. And so all of these things that make life decent, that lift people out of poverty, they give people meaning, that glorify God, are under direct assault by, as you called it, I think the globalist cult. I think it's a perfect term. These are wicked people who are taking aim at everything good and decent that God has ordained for mankind. And we as Christians must resist that with every fiber in our being.
2 questions. One, I want to posit a novel idea to you that I've had, that in densely populated areas, and from my understanding, there seems to be a higher rate of crime per capita compared to spaces that are spread out. So there's something to that notion that it's better for mankind. It doesn't mean we can't congregate and gather, but it seems to be that overall human development seems to thrive and is more rich when people are more spread out instead of being piled on top of each other. Do you think that's a novel idea, or do you think I'm onto something there by that conclusion?
I think you're absolutely onto something. In fact, that's why we're in the process of building a farm right now. I love being able to interact with a lot of people and do business and, get together for church and those kinds of things. But at the same time, I don't want to live like a sardine, on top of people, below people, next to people. We need a little bit of space. The world has plenty of space. Don't let the globalists deceive you. I mean, humans take up a postage stamp sized piece of territory on this planet. And I do think there's something to be said for the countryside and for everybody having their own little bit of space. Now, I don't begrudge people's cities, but I think you're absolutely right. And we see that trend not just around the United States, but around the world. Mm-hmm. The bigger cities get, the more crime, the more government, right? It's just a very unfortunate thing. And so right now we're in a fallen world. There is sin all over the place. Government's job is to check that sin. Unfortunately, government now seems to be throwing jet fuel on the dumpster fire of sin. But until, that stuff is crushed, we need to, I think, recognize that we should live as much as we can in the way that God intended.
And also, there is this whole idea of the 15-minute cities that these individuals want to posit, because it's easier to control the human population when we're all centralized and densely packed together. You can herd us like cattle in an easier way than if folks are spread out, because you notice how we've been brainwashed to think that folks that live in rural areas aren't so smart. We've been conditioned to believe that, farmers are dumb, like, oh, the dumb farmer quip. That is all conditioning to believe that. I mean, that is one of the most important jobs there is. These people grow our food. Right. And so how many citizens have not gotten into the agricultural space to where we could be more, equipped to grow food. And now we have Monsanto and these other entities who are growing our food. And we see the disastrous consequences and food allergies that we've never had before. But I'm going off onto a rabbit hole, because there's so many aspects of our lives as people are seeking to control and currently control, not seeking. This is actively implemented plan, whether it's our food, whether it's the entertainment, the air we breathe, our governments. It goes on and on and on. But the reason why this is important, something I really want to talk to you about, is the University of Hawaii study that came out in 2002 about democide. Could you talk to the audience about what exactly is democide, and why did we see a massive uptick in democide in the 20th century?
Yeah, so democide, put very simply, is just the widespread killing of human beings. Demos being people, side being murder. So we have genocide, where a particular type of people is targeted. We have regicide, where a king is targeted for murder. And then we have democide, where just people generally are murdered. And it turns out the leading cause of unnatural death in the world is actually death by government. A lot of people don't realize that, right? Well, why shouldn't the government take care of us like that? Well, how about the fact that it's the leading cause of unnatural death in human history, for starters, right? And so if you look around, even just if you look at the last 100 years, right? I mean, forget the rest of human history, which is just as terrible. Just look at the last 100 years. At least 100 million people murdered by their own governments, right? We're not talking about starting wars with other people and killing those people. We're talking about just people murdered by their own government that in theory was supposed to be protecting their rights, punishing evil, and so on. The Soviet Union, Communist China, Pol Pot, the lunatic in Cambodia, murdered almost half of the population of his country. So government is an incredibly dangerous institution. Now, to be clear, I'm not anti-government, right? Forget the Soviet Poverty Law Center. I'm very much pro-government, but government needs to follow God's laws. And God told us, and I've preached on this all over the country, God has told us very clearly why he instituted civil government. It's to be a terror unto evil. It's to punish evildoers. And so we don't get to define that. God has already told us what is evil and what is good. Evil is murder. Evil is rape. Evil is slavery. Evil is robbery. Evil is adultery. And so that's why we have government, to restrain sin in this world. When government breaks out of its box and it starts saying, well, I'm going to educate your kids for you, and I'm going to take stuff from your neighbor and give it to you to make you envious, that's when we get a huge problem. And I don't know whether George Washington ever really said this or not, but there's a quote attributed to him about government being kind of like a fire. Right? If the fire is in the fireplace, it's great. Keeps your house warm. You can cook on it, whatever. As soon as the fire gets out of the fireplace, or the government gets out of the bounds of where it's supposed to be, your whole house is going to burn down. Your family's going to die. So, folks, democide is very, very real. It hasn't gone away, and it is one of the most significant threats to our species. So be careful.
Well, there's a quote from Thomas Paine I like to cite a lot, that government, like dress, is a badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built on the ruins of paradise. So just like our clothing is a constant reminder of our sin nature, so is government. Because as you mentioned, we have to have government because people are evil. I mean,
Right.
no matter you go in the world, throughout human history, when I was in theology school, we learned about Sennacherib. And Sennacherib had on his palace, and you think of this as ancient history. On his palace walls, he had free relief sculptures of him filleting people and his soldiers filleting people. So if you're unaware what filleting somebody means, it's when you skin someone alive.
Mhm.
So human beings have never lost the creative mechanism, with guns or without guns, we'll get to that in a little bit, to figure out how to kill somebody and to be evil to one another. And it's only through the shed blood of Christ that we're anything, but it's also
Amen.
why we need faith in Christ, because if humans cannot restrain themselves, government necessarily grows. And I'll get to that a little later. But I wanted to quote something from the studies, actually even worse. Pre-20th century, but there are confirmed roughly 134,000 people were killed by their government. Hypothetical, according to this University of Hawaii study, there were 625,000 people killed by their government. From 1900 to 1999, 262 million people were killed by their government. So that's even worse. I mean, it's really a horrible situation. And one of the things that I found very interesting, and this is a direct quote from the study, is that they concluded that democratic freedom is a method of nonviolence and an engine of wealth and prosperity. The most practical and effective way to improve human security, promote nonviolence, and eliminate war, therefore, is to promote freedom and associated human rights. So our freedom is a necessary component. Our freedom is a necessary component to protecting us from a tyrannical government.
No question.
And also, in order to maintain a free society, we have to have morality, because the more immoral the people are, the more government grows. And oftentimes, I get criticized. I'm always, sounding like the just super judgy Christian, constantly lamenting about morality. It's like, one, I care about people's eternal souls, but number two, as a society, the more immoral we become, is always, you hit the citizen who goes, somebody has to do something. Somebody has to do something. So then who is the somebody, the external force that does something? Because this person isn't self-regulating. What's the external force that has to come in and quote unquote do something? It's government. Could you please speak to that?
Yeah, it is so true, right? That God put government here early on, actually, very early on in the Old Testament. We have, at the very beginning, murders, right? Cain and Abel, of course, right? So long before the invention of firearms, I should point out, right? He's killing people with a rock. And the reality is, when you read the scriptures, you understand that we are fallen. We have a sin nature. And what that means is that we are inclined to do evil. And the founding fathers of this country understood that very well. In fact, a lot of them came from the Calvinistic tradition, where they viewed mankind as what they called totally depraved, right? The total depravity of man. Like everything we do is like moving us towards sin. Now, I know Christians debate whether we are totally depraved or, whether there's some little bit of goodness in us somewhere. But the people who designed our system of government said, look, mankind is totally depraved. We cannot trust them. Even the ones who say they're good, even the ones who claim to be Christian, we cannot trust them with the ability to wield this power of the sword without very significant checks and balances. Now, they understood, as John Adams said, that our Constitution is made for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate for the government of any other. And I would argue that's true of almost any system of government. Mm-hmm. If you don't have a moral and religious people, wickedness is going to go far beyond what government is able to contain. But our founding fathers understood that we needed this system of checks and balances precisely because mankind was so wicked. So I think a big part of the reason government has gone so off track in this country is that the people who control the significant institutions that shape people's minds, for example, the public school system, they have adopted, going all the way back to Robert Owen and Horace Mann and John Dewey, the people who built our public school system, they adopted the position that mankind was essentially good. And the reason we had all these problems was because government wasn't educating us enough, or government wasn't taking care of the poor people enough. And of course, that is a totally flawed understanding of mankind. Mankind is innately wicked. Through Christ, we can be made righteous through his righteousness, not our own. But ultimately, in our fallen state on this planet, we are a people who are always seeking to do evil. We're always coveting. We're always thinking of new ways to get more and to oppress our fellow human beings. And so government needs to be very carefully restrained and managed to make sure that those same sinful, wicked, evil people don't get in charge of it and then use it to advance the evil even more.
Well, that's exactly the problem, I believe, from my experience in politics. I mean, my 5 years going from being a college instructor to being a major party nominee and then a state chairwoman, I firmly believe that the majority of people who are in government are complete criminals. And I stand by that firmly. These people betray our country consistently. And largely, many of these people come from these various institutes that we talk about. You know, they have their centers where they recruit up and coming people. They get them all indoctrinated into the globalist propaganda. Then they bankroll their funders of their institutes. Then bankroll these people's campaigns to then control our lives. What role do you believe the church has in protecting us from democide?
That's a very good question. And, I think the church has a lot of roles. And as you read the scripture, I'm continually astounded to always find new jobs for the church. Just about a year ago, I was in Ephesians chapter 3, and I saw that one of the roles of the church is to show God's manifold wisdom to the powers and principalities. And that hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, whoa. So, wow, one of our roles is to show the angels and the celestial hosts about God's wisdom. So that's really cool. But one of the big functions of the church is to equip the saints for every good work. Now, the church is kind of the conscience of a society. When the church is silent, when the church doesn't speak very clearly on God's design for morality, family, government, education, and every other area of life, what happens is something fills the void. And I think that's one of the reasons we're in this mess. For 70 years almost now, pastors have refused to preach on government. For the last few decades, pastors have refused to preach on other really critical things. Going back almost 100 years now, pastors have not taught much on education. So if the church remains silent, we have, depending on whose numbers you believe, 3/4 of Americans call themselves Christians. Go ask those people, what does the Bible say about government? What does the Bible say about family? What does the Bible say about the role of education in the lives of children? And the answer you're going to get more often than not is, I don't know, because the pastors haven't been teaching it. The elders haven't been teaching it. People haven't been reading their Bibles. So the church, I believe, is right at the center of the reason we have this mess, because the churches, and I'm generally speaking here, there are, of course, really good churches that are doing great work, but generally speaking, churches have fallen silent on all these issues, sometimes due to a fear of man, which is ridiculous. We should fear the Lord only, right? Sometimes because they don't want to lose their precious tax exemption. Oh no, the Johnson Amendment. Folks, if you're preaching based on what the government is going to think, you are serving the wrong master. So I think the church is supposed to equip the saints and explain to us how God's word applies to everything. And since it has not been doing that, these wicked ideas have come in and filled the void, and we find ourselves here now in this mess.
The Karamo Report needs you, so please like, share, and subscribe. You can also support this project by making a contribution. We greatly appreciate your support. Now back to the show. Yeah, there's something I call cul-de-sac Christianity, where a lot of people just want to cut themselves off. As long as I manage my household in the biblical way, I run my life in the biblical way. As far as living a pure life, I've done my part. I'm on my way to heaven. The rest of this is let the world sort itself out. And that is such a really evil way to think, because we're supposed to be soldiers and ambassadors for Christ. If you look at the early church, they didn't go hide away in their houses. No, they went out and they did the necessary work to obey and glorify God, spread the gospel, and oppose evil. You even see Apostle Paul say that we're supposed to pray for those leaders and those in authority so we may live quiet and peaceable lives. So clearly God cares about who's in charge. In Proverbs, we see when the righteous are in authority, the people rejoice. When the wicked are in authority, the people, they moan. So clearly God cares about who's in charge. So we have a job to do. And also, when you mention the word void, I think it's so important, because too many times in our society, there's been a problem. And then when the church is silent, then the world speaks up. Then oftentimes now, not only do you have a satanic solution to a problem, but then the church is seen as weak. And many people really don't care what the church has to say, because they're like, well, these people over here are speaking to the problem that ails me, and you're just telling me that, not my problem. So that is a massive issue. And also, I think there has been another problem is our seminary schools, many of them. So when I was in theology school, there was a book we had to read. Now, our school, I went to Biola University, so our professor just wanted us to see what was out there, some of the other garbage that was out there. So they were not promoting this book. But a book we had to read was from a guy named Eric Seibert. The book is about violence in scripture. And the class I was taking was about violence and monotheism and messianic expectations. And so this book our professor had us read, I mean, I wanted to throw this book across the room. In this book, the guy is positing that God engages in evil, whether it's the ban on the Canaanites or the worldwide flood. Then he laments in the book that, that sexual minorities and other groups are not mentioned in scripture or not elevated in scripture. It was absolutely horrific. Now, the reason why this is important to mention, because our teacher had us read the book so we could see other theories that were out there. But the guy who wrote the book is a theology professor. So can you imagine the students who come through his class, who go to theology school? We have one job when you go to theology school. Our job is to help keep people out of hell. That's it. That's our only responsibility. And these theology schools are training up these pastors, not all of them, of course. I love Biola, but these theology schools are training these people up into pure wickedness. So really quick story. So I, for a short period of time, sat on the sex education board for Detroit Public Schools. And there I was in a parent advisory role. And so nevertheless, some of the potential curriculum that was coming down is what you would expect it to be. So I'm looking for an ally on the board. So according to Michigan law, there has to be a clergy member on the board. So I look for the clergy member, thinking I'm going to find an ally in this person. And when I went to look them up, I saw a bunch of stuff on their Facebook profile that let me know that they're a Democrat, but fair enough. That doesn't mean they can't be a Christian. And then when I looked at her LinkedIn page, what she has listed as her thesis for theology school was about female sexuality, a liberative ethic. Oh. And I'm just beside myself. I mean, our goal is one thing, one job is to help keep people out of hell. That's it. And then this is demonic. So you have people who are going to theology schools who are being trained up in demonic ideology. So are we surprised that so many of the churches in America aren't even equipping people to go resist Satan in the public square? What say
Amen.
you?
You're absolutely right. The infiltration of our seminaries has been going on for at least 100 years. And to pick up on that point, I just recently put together a talk called Doctrines of Demons in the Schools. And the truth is, in the most literal sense, children all across this country are being taught actual doctrines of demons. So as you were talking, I was thinking of Alice Bailey. Right? People don't know who Alice Bailey was. Extremely influential. She was one of the guiding luminaries of the UN. In fact, the guy who wrote the World Core Curriculum, which they said needs to be taught to every child in every school in every country, said the World Core Curriculum was based on the teachings of Alice Bailey. And so Alice Bailey was the founder of the Lucifer Publishing Company. She claimed to be channeling this ascended master called Javal Kul. And if you read the ramblings of this lunatic and the lady she was following, Helena Blavatsky, this whole theosophy movement, sounds a lot like what you're talking about there. They argue that Lucifer is actually the good guy here, that Jehovah, God, Yahweh had us imprisoned in this terrible garden. And then Lucifer, the light bringer, showed up and brought us knowledge and taught us right from wrong and this kind of stuff. So it's a total inversion of the biblical account. And then you look at the people who created the so-called educational system. That's actually the subject of my new book on education, Indoctrinating Our Children to Death. These were people who absolutely rejected Christianity, who absolutely rejected everything that the Bible teaches and adopted doctrines of demons. The first guy that seriously proposed that the government ought to educate our children was talking to spirits. I've got the transcripts where he talked about this in a speech. The next guy, Horace Mann, Unitarian, rejected God, rejected the Bible, believed man was innately good. Then the next guy after that, John Dewey, author of the Humanist Manifesto, co-author of the Humanist Manifesto. Very first plank says the universe is self-existing and not created. So at every step of the way, through education, down to the earliest grades, all the way up through college, all the way through seminary, it's literally, and people struggle with this, and even Christians are uncomfortable with it. It's literally demonic. It's literally doctrines from the pit of hell that Jesus warned us about.
You know, it's interesting you say that. When I think of Rules for Radical, Saul Alinsky dedicates his book to Lucifer. And
That's
so
right.
when you talk about these Luciferians, and again, you know, I want, one of my final questions will be in regard to this, because when you talk about these Luciferians, people go, oh, wait a minute. That's just a little too crazy. It said, well, welcome to the world of politics. It's going to get darker from there. These Luciferians, they don't worship Lucifer. He is their mentor. That's what people need to understand. They don't worship the devil. No. They're too high and mighty to worship anything.
That's right. They worship themselves. That's exactly right.
Lucifer is their mentor. And correct me if I'm wrong. Now, I've heard this. I don't know if it's accurate. You may or may not know. But from what I understand, the Lucius Trust Group, they're the only religious temple inside of the United Nations. Do you know if that's true or not?
Well, there's a very interesting story there. I was just at UN headquarters, 7 months ago for the Summit of the Future. And normally you're allowed to go into, they call it the prayer and meditation room. It is the most bizarre thing you ever saw. And Alice Bailey and the Lucius Trust, which was the new name they came up for the Lucifer Publishing Company, because Lucifer Publishing was just a little too obvious. They helped design this thing. So if you look at the influence of Alice Bailey and her movement, within the UN, it is, I think, arguably the most important religion or faith tradition intertwined at every step of the way with the development of the UN, going all the way back, incidentally, to the first meeting where they wrote the charter for the UN in San Francisco. The weirdo who represented us there, Alger Hiss, State Department guy, used to be the head of the Carnegie Foundation. They liked him so much, they made him the chairman of the conference that wrote the UN Charter. Then they made him this first Secretary General of the United Abominations. He took all these clowns from San Francisco up to the Bohemian Grove, where they're doing rituals like the cremation of care. And people are thinking like, whoa, what is he talking about? This is crazy. It's crazy, but I'm not the crazy one. That's the crazy stuff.
Yeah. And now, to your point, Alex, this is the thing. When you go down what's quote unquote called the rabbit hole, it's like, we're not crazy. They're crazy.
They're crazy. Exactly.
About how crazy these people are.
That's right.
But the thing about it is, not only they're crazy. I mean, if this stuff wasn't really happening, Alex, to me, it would be comical. It would actually be somewhat humorous and entertaining. But the sad part, the scary part, is it's true. And these people have billions, if not trillions of dollars at their disposal. They operate from your local government all the way to national government and in global governance. And they're very serious, and they fund the media. They fund the media through their sponsorships, by the way. You notice why the media will never criticize, any of the pharmaceutical companies. They're their largest sponsors. Or like when I ran for Secretary of State, now that office had nothing to do with many of the topics we're talking about. Your major responsibility was as chief election officer, but they would demonize me and all these other things. And one of the things that CNN just had an absolute meltdown over was the fact that I questioned Darwinian evolution. It was just, she questioned evolution. And so it's a religion for these people. It's scientism. It's a complete religion for these people. And so they have to fight back against biblical creationism, because they have to have another explanation for our existence. They have to. I mean, when I was studying apologetics at Biola, we heard so many stories of professors who simply questioned Darwinism. They didn't even get into creationism. They just stopped at intelligent design that points out that basically, for lack of a better phrase, somebody made us. We're not, intelligent design doesn't even get into who made us. It's just because the who is theology, but somebody made us. That is very logical based on all observable evidence. But asking that question, challenging the common ancestor, laws of the foolishness of Darwinian evolution, you're labeled an absolute heretic. So they have to push Christians out of the public square. And this is why, I don't want to use the word criminal because that would be over the top, but it's so upsetting to see there aren't a lot of pastors who are willing to aggressively fight these people, because it's the reason why they're pushing Christians out of the public square. It's the reason why they want to push us out of these medical positions and leadership roles, because they can't implement their Luciferian agenda if you got a bunch of Christians running around in leadership roles. What say you?
Right. Especially Christians who know the Bible and what the Bible says about all these important areas. It's so true. It's so true. And we're trying to change that. For several years now, I've been working with my very good friend, Pastor Paul Blair. We've done these programs all across the country now, the Liberty Pastors training programs. We did one in Michigan not long ago, and we have another one coming up in Michigan later this year for the folks up there. If you know a pastor, send them to this. All expenses paid, except, you just get yourself there. We'll cover your hotel, your food, all of it. And we have now trained thousands of pastors across the country on what the Bible teaches in every area of life. And I love the way Paul Blair starts this off. He says, what area of your life is Jesus not the Lord of? Right? If he's not the Lord of that area, that's what you got to focus on, because Jesus should be the Lord over your whole life. And we have really lost that. And I do think that's the problem. If Christians would study the Word, if pastors would preach, as Paul says, the whole counsel of God, this problem would go away really, really quick, because we wouldn't be deceived by the lies of politicians. We would have much better representation at every level of government. So we have got to convince pastors and elders to follow God's word on all these different areas. And if we can do that, we can turn around this mess of a country that we find ourselves in very quickly. The problem is, can we do that?
Yeah, you bring up a great point. I never want the audience to think that I'm acting as though there are no great pastors. There are no pastors who are willing. You think of folks like Matt Trewhella. There are pastors
Amen.
who are standing in the gap, who are speaking up, who are laying it on the line, not just in America, but other countries as well. So I don't want people to think that I'm saying there aren't any, but obviously there aren't enough. Because if there were enough, we wouldn't find ourselves in the situation we're in. And one of the things I do want to show you a clip really quickly. But the other thing is, when we talk about this kind of Luciferian conspiracy, or these various people, and how they are able to train and deploy their people. If you notice in the West, in Western countries, we all seem to move in the same direction. So if you see the UK or Canada or Germany go in a certain direction, we know that it's coming to the United States soon, because they have like the World Economic Forum with their young global leaders. They have their young global leaders. Then those folks go off in the various governments in the West. So the reason why that's important, because I want to segue to something it's a clip from 2020 from the Canadian Parliament. So I want to get your reaction to this clip, and I want to get into quickly the subject of AI. Please play the clip.
Next question, the member for Lanark, Frontenac, Kingston.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Premier. In my supplemental question yesterday, I asked this government if the people of Ontario should prepare for internment camps. In September, the federal government posted a call for expressions of interest for contractors to supply, provide, and manage quarantine isolation camps throughout every province and every territory in Canada. These quarantine isolation camps, however, are not limited to people with COVID, but provide a wide latitude for many people to be detained. Surely this government is aware of the intentions to build these isolation camps from coast to coast. And my question to the Premier is, how many of these camps will be built, and how many people does this government expect to detain?
Question. Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is very true that when people leave the country and when they come back in, that the province is suggesting, and the federal government, in cooperation with the federal government, we are suggesting that people isolate themselves. That has been a practice that has been very successful, not only here in the province of Ontario, but across Canada. And we will, of course, be redoubling our efforts to make sure that the people of the province of Ontario remain safe, Mr. Speaker. So if the member is referring to the fact that that one of the public health policies is that when you return from a jurisdiction outside of the province of Ontario or from another country, that you isolate yourself for 2 weeks, I would suggest that has been a good policy that has been working. In fact, this House has been doing the same thing since we came back. We are working in cohorts to make sure that the Legislative Assembly can continue to operate. That's why we have 2 separate cohorts, Mr. Speaker.
Response.
With the cooperation of the official opposition, that is why all members of the Independents have been excluded from that cohort, because we want them to be able to participate in debate. So we will continue to do everything in our power to make sure that this House continues, but that the people of the province of Ontario and Canada are kept safe.
Supplementary question.
Again, back to the Premier. Here's the RFP, and in the RFP it uses clear language to express that these camps can be used for a broad spectrum of people. not limited to travelers. Indeed, it doesn't even mention international travelers. It's just a broad latitude of people. And I'll send over the copy of the RFP after. So your government must be in negotiations and aware of these plans to potentially detain and isolate citizens and residents of our country and our province. So, Speaker, to the Premier, where will these camps be built? How many people will be detained? And for what reasons? For what reasons can people be kept in these isolation camps? And I'd like to have the Premier assure the people of Ontario.
Member, take a seat.
What's really interesting, just for the audience's clarification, is the Canadian government in September 2020 put forth an RFP to contractors to help build and maintain quarantine and isolation camps. And at the end there, the guy actually is cut off by the Speaker of the Canadian Parliament. His mic's cut off and he's not allowed to speak any further. I don't know if you were familiar with that story, and also what's very interesting, if you notice when he asked the question, the Premier didn't answer his question. He just went on talking about other things. Were you aware of the Canadian government looking for help in building quarantine and isolation camps to detain their citizens? Were you aware of this?
I was, and it wasn't just the Canadians. So the state of New York was looking at this. The government, the regime in Australia was doing similar things. And here's something that's going to really freak people out. Fact check it for yourself. The U.S. government was building massive camps all across this country. They got caught. The New York Times actually reported on this, and the official excuse from Darth Vader, aka Dick Cheney, was, "Oh, that's in case a bunch of illegal immigrants ever come across the border someday." It's like, no, you want the illegal immigrants here, so we know that's not what they're for. Right? Why are these megalomaniacs building all these camps? Well, they hope that they're eventually going to put people like you and I in there. But you know, God's got an interesting sense of humor. What comes to mind is the story of Mordecai and Haman and the gallows, and we all know how that ended up. So who knows who might end up in those camps someday?
Not us, right? So with that, I want to segue to the question regarding AI, because as AI is being ramped up, and here's the thing, AI to me is like any other tool. It can be used for good or bad. But I am very concerned that AI is going to be used as a tool for our enslavement. So folks like Larry Ellison, the co-founder of Oracle, he says that AI should be used to surveil citizens. They'll make us act on our best behavior. And so he really tries to market it about, oh, well, police will wear, these cameras and we can see everything. And then he also likes to throw in the mix as well that, hey, citizens will now be on our best behavior because we're all being surveilled. Then you have Sam Altman from OpenAI who claims that there will be some unpopular decisions from AI developers in the name of safety. And those folks were just at the White House about a month or two ago to discuss a $500 billion private investment into AI. And many folks are cheering this on. And I'm like, not just based on what I know about the globalist cult, but just based on these folks' own words. And when we talked earlier about democide, so I have a two-part question. How dangerous is the growth of AI and how much more proficient? We've seen how much more proficient governments have been at killing people from the first several thousand years of human history to 1900 to 1999. So how much more proficient could governments be in not just mass murdering, but surveilling, imprisonment, and other forms of abuse or harassment of the citizenry with AI? And how big of a threat is it? Am I crazy?
Absolutely not. In fact, I think it's a major concern. And to your first point, yes, AI is a tool, just like any other tool, in that it can be used for good or for evil. You think of a firearm, right? A firearm can be used to defend innocent women and children from monsters, or it could be used to hurt innocent people, right? Same thing with the internet, right? It can be and is used for absolutely wicked purposes, from pornography to surveilling citizens to manipulating everybody to Internet of Things so they can track everything you do. All of those are terrible, terrible things that the internet is being used for as a tool. But then, of course, we're also using internet to do this podcast and to get this information out to people so that they can make better decisions and try to preserve life, liberty, and property. So I think AI is going to be very much the same. Donald Trump is being told right now, I know, that we have to do this because if not, the Chi-Coms are going to do it, and if the Chi-Coms do it first, they're going to use it to kill Americans and destroy America, and that's probably true, right? The mass murdering regime in Communist China has been built up now over a period of generations by American government leaders, by American corporate leaders, to the point where now it is a genuine threat to the very existence of the United States and to freedom around the world. So that's a legitimate argument, I think, but to think for one moment that Larry Ellison and Sam Altman and all these tech bros in Silicon Valley want to use AI to preserve freedom or civilization is the height of naivete and lunacy. These people want to use it to enslave mankind. And so what I think Christians ought to be doing, especially Christians who are computer-minded, tech-minded, learn this stuff and use these same tools to promote the gospel, to promote individual freedom. And we're seeing this kind of in the crypto space, right? Some people want to use crypto to build a digital currency that's going to be basically a panopticon where they can surveil and control everything we do. Other people are using these same kinds of technologies to figure out ways that we can have permissionless payments and permissionless moving of capital around the world. So this is going to be an ongoing struggle for a long time. If the megalomaniacs are allowed to run free with this and we don't have the opportunity to stop them, they will absolutely use this for democide, for mass enslavement. But if people who are decent, people who love the Lord, can also use these tools to counteract that and for other good purposes, we may see some really good things coming out of it as well. So,
it makes me think of like the Roman roads. The Roman roads were very beneficial to the spread of the gospel for the early church.
Amen.
But those roads were also used for evil. So sometimes, it's like you say, it's a tool. And it's important for us to have our eyes wide open, because while people are in this euphoria that Kamala Harris is not in the White House, well, guess what? 4 years, we're going to have somebody else. And they may just be horrible. So we have to be very thoughtful and not be so quick to cheer things on, not thinking like we're going to have new people and we don't know who that next person is going to be. And they could be an absolute monster. So we need to be thoughtful of that. So I want to move on quickly, because I know we have to wrap up, but there's so many questions I have to ask you. Please, Unearthing the CO2 Pipeline. That was an excellent documentary. I recommend everyone watch it. I was surprised just watching some of the maps that these CO2 pipelines, these capturing CO2 underground, these plans are for everywhere. Where I live in Michigan, it's like the globalists won't leave us alone. Can you please talk about why this is such an important issue?
Well, let's start with the very beginning here. These evil-doing globalists are trying to convince humanity that the gas we exhale is toxic pollution that's going to destroy the planet. And I feel stupid just saying it because it's so unbelievably idiotic from a scientific perspective, right? The planet is starving for more CO2. Plants are designed, Donald Trump's climate advisor, Will Happer from Princeton, told me, to live in an atmosphere with 4 to 5 times as much CO2 as we have right now. So the planet would be much better off with more CO2. But these maniacs are trying to convince us that CO2 is bad and therefore must be regulated, controlled, and taxed, not just by nation states, but by global authorities. And so the carbon capture pipelines, and I encourage people to watch this documentary. You can find it at standyourground.watch. It's produced by Stand Your Ground Studios, affiliated with the New American Magazine, John Birch Society, et cetera. And what they're trying to do with these CO2 pipelines is create a new constituency. I mean, first of all, it's another scam to rip off the middle class, very clearly, right? They're stealing our tax money and pumping it into the pockets of their cronies to build stupid things that destroy wealth, take farmland out of production, et cetera. But much more importantly than that, this is a plan to ultimately re-engineer the entire global political, economic, and religious system. And so the carbon capture pipelines are a part of that. Yes, it will be used so that the mega banks and the energy producers can scam more money out of us, right? Because then they're going to make money from the taxpayer. They're going to make money on the credits. They're going to make money pumping it down, all that stuff. But if they succeed in convincing humanity that the gas of life is dangerous pollution, what comes along with that is, and they've made this very clear, global government, global taxes. And as we speak, they're working on this right now. Just 2 weeks ago in London, the International Maritime Organization met. That's a UN agency that deals with international shipping in the ocean. They met and they approved the first ever global tax on humanity for carbon dioxide emissions coming out of ships. So nobody's talking about this. It's some of the most earth-shattering news, but they want you to pay a tax every time you buy a good at your store that came in on a ship. Every time you export a good that goes on a ship. So your average American probably won't notice it, but this is going to give the UN direct access to tax money where they don't have to go through national governments anymore. They just have their mitts directly in your pocket. So taken all together, they're even working on redefining religion and morality. I'm working on an article about this right now for the New American. I was in Egypt for the UN Climate Summit when they went up to the top of Mount Sinai, all these world religious leaders, and unveiled the new and supposedly improved 10 Commandments. And I kid you
Wow.
not, I've
I
got all
believe
this
it.
stuff. And I mean,
God
some of these are so crazy. Christina, it's like one is like compassion means feeling the cries of Mother Earth. No, it doesn't. Right? Mother Earth is a rock, and God put it here for us, for our benefit. It's going to be burned up. Okay, so this is crazy. And at the same time, I interviewed one of the leaders of this clown show, James Sternlicht from the Peace Department, CEO of the Peace Department. And he said to me, not only do we have this new 10 Commandments, we're also now working on the third covenant, which we're going to use to build the kingdom of heaven here on earth. So I'm thinking, look, God gave us the 10 Commandments. The UN and Friends has the new and improved 10 Commandments. God gave us the old covenant, the new covenant. The UN and Friends is now working on the third covenant. So the hubris here is out of control.
Sometimes, Alex, I ask myself, are these people reading Bible prophecy? Okay, we're going to do this part here. We're going to do this part here. or is it God, or is it just, they don't even know what they're doing. They're just so demonic. They don't even realize what they're doing. Or are they actually like acting out the parts? Because this is just, my mind is blown right now. This is news to me. You can clearly tell. Like these God wannabes never cease to amaze me. They never cease to amaze me. Yeah, and what's really interesting is the Bill Gates innovating zero speech. I'm sure you've seen that when he gave his TED talk about how we're going to lower CO2 to get to zero. We got to have, what was it? Vaccines, healthcare, and birth control. Now, birth control, I get how that lowers the human population, but how are vaccines and healthcare going to lower the human population? And he tried to clean that up so much. Well, in countries where women are healthier, they have less children. No, in countries where women have fertility problems, they have less children. Okay,
right. Where they've been injected with toxic batches of aluminum and mercury, and truly incredible. They are absolutely sterilizing people with these injections.
Well, it's so crazy. I remember some years ago, I saw a speech from a guy who, I forget his name. He's from Uganda, and he was saying no more aid to Africa. And his point is that oftentimes these quote unquote benevolent programs, they claim they want to give aid to these African countries or other third world countries, but in reality, they're using the people like guinea pigs for experiments. So in exchange for this grain or some other supplement or something the country is lacking, can you take this experimental vaccine or shot or anything like that, so then we can go off and try to sell it to everybody else. So we could go on and on. I really want to respect your time because we could go on for another 2 hours about all the demonic things that these people are up to. But I have to ask you one question before I let you go. There's so much more I would love to talk about, but I gotta let you go. One question: how do you define the word conspiracy theorist? I have to ask you that.
Well, there is the term conspiracy theorist that the CIA has tried to demonize, and then there are the legitimate definitions of those words. So I mean, some people misuse the word conspiracy to the point where they think conspiracy means a crazy idea or a crazy explanation for something. In fact, if you go to the dictionary, you'll find the word conspiracy, and it says roughly, depending on what version or what dictionary you use, 2 or more people working in secret for some illegal or immoral or wicked purpose. Okay, that's what a conspiracy is. The Department of Justice charges people with conspiracy every weekday of the year. Okay, there are conspiracies everywhere. The Bible is filled with conspiracies. There are conspiracies in your local town where a city councilman is steering a contract to his brother-in-law right this moment to put up signs or something like that, right? These are small conspiracies. And yet somehow we're supposed to believe that it's silly that more powerful people might also work together for nefarious. No, could you imagine government leaders? They're so moral and upright. They would never do that. Right? So it's so ludicrous. The response, it's like a Pavlovian response, right? They've conditioned people now, just like Pavlov's dogs, to salivate when they hear the idea that people might be conspiring together. But guess what? David Rockefeller, one of the most powerful individuals of the last century, certainly, he brags in his book, his memoirs, published in 2012, I believe. It's on page 405. You can go check it yourself.
I have boasts,
that book. Right? And people can get it at their local library. This is not Alex. This is David Rockefeller saying that some even say that they accuse my family and me of being internationalists, of conspiring with others around the world to build a more integrated global and political system. against the best interests of my own country. And he says, if that's the charge, I stand guilty and I'm proud. So he's proud of conspiring with a secret cabal. In his words, there's no theory there, folks. That's a fact. Now, there can be theories. We can theorize about possible conspiracies, but conspiracy is very real, and people who don't recognize that have been massively deceived, and they're avoiding what's obvious right in front of them, that evil people work together against your best interests for their own best interests.
Yeah, I think some of it is people are in denial because if they acknowledge that the things that we are discussing as true, I think one or two things. One, they realize they need to do something about it. And number two, that comfortable day-to-day life is just shattered. And it is shattering to a certain extent, because sometimes I think I wish I was ignorant of this stuff. My life would be so much easier. I probably could do something as simple like run an ice cream shop or go open a candy store or something so happy, or a beauty supply store, just something just so happy and joyful where everyone's coming in with smiles and it's never a problem. But the reality is, we are facing a demonic conspiracy, and people better wake up before we find ourselves enslaved in internment camps. So, Alex,
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. You're such a blessing. Thank you for all the work you do on informing so many people and getting the message out there. And I pray for your prayers, for your protection as you continue to spread the news. God bless you.
God bless you too. Thank you so much, Kristina. It's a great honor and a pleasure to be here.
I hope you all enjoyed the interview today with Alex Newman and that you learned a lot. Please make sure that you check out his website, libertysentinel.org, for all the latest articles and updates that he has available to you. And also, do your own research. Don't just take our word for it. Many people can make claims, but the truth is out there available for you. And the importance of you being independently informed of what is happening, the threat of the globalist cult, is that you can go share that information with others and do it in a meaningful and convincing way because you are actually informed on the matter. Visit theKaramoReport.com. Make sure that you like, share, and subscribe and support this project so we can continue to bring you great content. God bless.